Hey everyone! I know it's a little hard to recognize me, but it's Yoni from Stand With Us. Here, let me give you a little bit of a better view. We are coming to you now from Jerusalem. Thank God. We are moving forward, beginning to come out of our houses here in Jerusalem, and with some of the relaxed restrictions, we're now able to tour around outside, and we wanted to make sure that we were still bringing you Israel and Jerusalem, no matter where you are, no matter what the conditions might be. We want to show you Israel. And we're here in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. Soon we'll be celebrating Jerusalem Day, the anniversary of Jerusalem's reunification. And before we can begin to appreciate what happened in 1967, the heroics and the miracle of 1967, we need to actually understand 1948. What happened during the War of Independence? So there's a lot we could talk about here in the Jewish quarter, but as we get ready for Jerusalem Day, we're going to focus on the Jewish quarter and the battle for the Jewish quarter in 1948. And the story, in some ways, doesn't begin where we are right now. It actually culminates where we are right now, looking at this beautiful building, the Chorva Synagogue. This is a synagogue that goes back to the year 1700, when a charismatic rabbi by the name of Rabbi Judah the Pious, Yehuda Hasid, convinces about 300 of his worshippers, of his followers, not his worshippers, excuse me, hey guys, if we want to bring the redemption, we can't sit around in Europe, we need to come to Jerusalem and start building Jerusalem to bring the redemption. Again, this guy's so charismatic, about 300 families come with him. They begin building up a neighborhood more or less where we're standing right now. They had a small little synagogue, but Judah the Pious, he passed away. He passed away a mere 5 days after coming to Jerusalem. And over the years, the loans that he took out for his followers here became too heavy. And the followers couldn't repay the debt. And eventually, the moneylenders came to the small synagogue they had here. No, not like this. Small synagogue, courtyard neighborhood here, and they burned it down. Ashkenazi Jews, Jews of European descent, couldn't come to Jerusalem after that because of the weight of that debt. It was only in the 19th century, with help from Moses Montefiore and Jacob Rothschild, that they could eliminate that debt and rebuild the synagogue. And the synagogue they built was more or less the synagogue that we see here. A couple of minor changes. The thing is, in 1948, as David Ben-Gurion, on May 14th, 1948, announces Israel's declaration of independence in Tel Aviv, the Jordanians are already making their way to the Jewish quarter. The Jewish quarter, old city, has been evacuated by the British a day before. And as the Jordanians begin fighting here, they realize they have an issue. The issue is they're not trained in urban warfare. All of these tall buildings going house to house poses a threat to them. And one by one, they start blowing the buildings up. There's about 2 weeks of fighting between the residents of the Jewish quarter and the Jordanian legionnaires, the strongest army in the Middle East at the time. One by one, the buildings are blown up throughout those 2 weeks, and eventually they arrive here at the Chorva Synagogue, the destroyed synagogue of Rabbi Judah the Pious. That's where it gets its name from. And they blow the Chorva Synagogue up. And a cry goes out on the radio, HaChorva Charva, the destroyed synagogue has been destroyed. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the next day, Friday, May 28th, 1948, the Jews of the Jewish quarter gather not far from here to surrender to the Jordanians. We're going to walk now, give you a sense of, first of all, what it's like here in Jerusalem, not post-corona, but as we begin to ease restrictions, but also to follow some of that story of the surrender as it unfolds. And I know this is going to be a little tough. I want you to wait and look for the light at the end of the tunnel, because this whole time as we walk through the darkness of the surrender of 1948 and the difficult battle, our face is going to be towards the miracle of 1967. So, without further ado, come with me, everyone. We're making our way now through the Jewish quarter, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out the beautiful menorah, the gold-plated menorah that now makes its home here. in front of the Horva synagogue as they are doing renovations to the western wall, to the kotel. And I'm going to put my mask back on since we're going into a crowded area. And let's take a little bit of a look at the life that exists here in the Jewish quarter. Slowly but surely, people are coming back to the streets of Jerusalem. It's unfortunately not what we had in mind in terms of tourism this 2020, but slowly but surely people are coming out of their homes, and at least we're bringing Jerusalem to you, even if you can't be a part of Jerusalem right now. But start booking your tickets, start looking forward and looking for that light at the end of the tunnel, because as soon as you can, we need you to come back to Jerusalem. Now, the battle that occurs here in the Jewish quarter, like I said, is a 2-week battle against one of the toughest armies, if not the toughest army, in the Middle East at the time. And to give you an understanding of the challenges that the Jewish quarter, the defenders of the Jewish quarter are facing, as well as the challenges that the residents of the Jewish quarter are facing, we're talking about 2,000 Jordanian soldiers who are making their way here, and towards the end of the fighting, we're looking at, I'm being generous when I say there were somewhere between 80 to 100 Israeli soldiers fighting here at the time in the nascent IDF. All right, come on through the alleyway. Imagine what the battle would have been like in these streets right here. How fierce it must have been. We're coming this way. We're going to go around here. Little by little, the residents of the Jewish quarter, they're losing ground more and more and more. And as we turn the corner here, we're actually getting to one of the last areas, the final refuges of the residents of the Jewish quarter. Come over here. I want to show you a very special synagogue. Come on right up this way. Watch your step with the stairs. We're standing right now in front of the Istanbuli synagogue. It's one of 4 Sephardic, 4 Middle Eastern synagogues, as opposed to, European Ashkenazi Jewry. This is a compound of 4 synagogues that around the 18th century, they started building them up more and more, and as the space ran out, they had to create new areas. Go on through. To create new areas and renovate this synagogue. They built 1 room and it wasn't enough, so they added on another room. One of the school rooms ended up becoming part of the synagogue, and then when they ran out of space completely, the hallway actually became the 4th synagogue. But the Istanbuli synagogue is very special because in some ways, come on through. In some ways, it's hard to tell people, I'm so happy to see people on the street. It's hard to tell them to wait for the filming. I want you guys to see them as well. This door represents, like the final bomb shelter, the place of refuge for the Jews of the Jewish quarter. Within the Istanbuli synagogue and some of the other, the other 4 synagogues, the Jewish residents are gathered as the battle rages on. And it's a battle that is really, in some ways, it's a lost cause. They're not going to be able to get through this battle. And when the Horva synagogue is blown up, they know that they have to surrender. But something interesting happens to at least 1 or 2 of the soldiers. Come this way, I want to show you something. I don't know how many times you've walked through the streets of Jerusalem and you've seen, you've looked at these doors, you've known what they are or what they aren't. I'm going to put my mask back on as we continue with our walk past residential areas. But I want you to take a look at what's in the window up here. Take a look at the rifle in the window. That is actually one of the rifles from 1948, from the battle for the Jewish quarter. The story is that the children of the family that lives here, the Chizdai family, they were wandering around in their house one day, and they have a beautiful house with an outdoor courtyard and all sorts of water cisterns, and These boys are playing in the water cistern and exploring, and out of the water cistern, they pull rifles. They pulled out a rifle, and I think they pulled out a couple others. And they were trying to understand what they were, and the theory is that right before the surrender, the Israeli soldiers who were stationed here, some of them, said they might be able to kick us out, the Jordanians might kick us out, but they're not going to get our weapons. That was part of the terms that the Jordanians were negotiating, and apparently some of them hid their weapons in the cistern. And the Khizdai family decided to put that rifle up there in tribute to all those who fought, as well as those who fell for the Jewish quarter. All right, we're coming through the alleyway right now, and this is a chance, we'll take a small break from talking about the difficulties of the battle, and let's just give you a chance to kind of get a sense of what it's like here in the Jewish quarter. For those of you who it's been a while, who had maybe had plans to come here but weren't able to, now's your chance to kind of experience it yourself, and I'm actually going to let you go ahead of me in just 1 minute. Go on ahead of me, get a look of this for yourself. Don't close your eyes, because I want you to open them, keep them open, and see this. But imagine right now you're back in Jerusalem. You're back in the Jewish quarter. You're walking through those streets of gold that we all know and love, or maybe we all dreamed about for all these years. Those of you who haven't made it yet, just breathe it all in. And as we turn the corner here, I would be remiss not to talk about what we're about to walk past. Come over this way. I have to point this out real quick. I mentioned that there were many people who fell in the fight for the Jewish quarter. And what we see here is actually what was their burial place for some of these soldiers. They couldn't be buried outside of the old city because Jerusalem was under siege. So getting to the Mount of Olives, which was the traditional burial place, had to wait. It actually had to wait 19 years until 1967. And the fighters, the defenders of the Jewish quarter were actually interred here. And I want to point out one name, and we'll talk about it a little more around the corner. Nissim Gini. I want to point out the name of Nissim Gini over here. And let's go around where it's a little more quiet, and we'll talk about him. Again, it's noisy, but it's hard for me to complain about people, being out and seeing each other for the first time, and I don't know, however, maintaining social distancing, of course, keeping 2 meters from each other, as my cameraman and I are doing as well. And I want to introduce you, before we talk about where we are, I want to introduce you to Nissim Gini real quick. Get out of the street, get out of the way. Nissim Gini has the unfortunate honor of being the youngest soldier to fall, not just in defending the IDF, but in the history, not just in defending the Jewish quarter, but in the history of the IDF. I'm looking for his picture for you right now. I'm warning you, it's not a very good picture, but I hope you get some sense of who he was. Hopefully I'll speak a little clearer right now. Nissim Gini was 10 years old at the time, and the story is told that he was, hiding as IDF soldiers, or the just developing IDF soldiers. The IDF was just becoming the Israel Defense Forces at the time. They're going house to house, and they're clearing out the Jewish families and telling them, you've got to get to the refuge place. You can't just stay here. And Nissim Gini, when they tell him he has to leave, he says, no, you have to take me with you to fight. And according to the legend, they say, how old are you? And he says, I'm 16 years old. And they look at him and they go, come on, kid. And there's a back and forth. He says, okay, I'm 15. They go, really? All right, I'm 14, and so on and so forth, until eventually says, fine, next year I'll be 11 years old. And then they realized, okay, this is a kid who's tenacious. We want to have him with us. And he was running communications from post to post. That's how difficult the situation was when he was hit by Jordanian sniper fire and died. And he was interred there with the other defenders of the Jewish quarter until 1967. A young boy who was, unfortunately, and this is a little bit graphic, but when they exhumed the bodies The way they actually were able to identify Nisim Gini was because he still had his baby teeth. That's how young he was. And that's the reality of the fight here in the Jewish quarter, where you can't just rely on the full-time soldiers. Even 10-year-old boys are getting involved. And that sets the stage for where we are right now. And I want to bring you in now to the courtyard of Batei Machaseh, of the shelter houses. Their name is derived from the fact that in the middle of the 19th century, there was a housing crisis here in Jerusalem. It was really, really difficult for new Jewish immigrants to find a place to live. And the help of benefactors like the Rothschild family, who this building is named after, and if you look very closely, you can actually see their emblem at the top of the building. There were about 100 apartments that were built in this courtyard to house families. You know, they were talking about two-room apartments, but they're new and they're rent controlled. And anyone who was poor, actually, not anyone who was anyone, everyone was trying to get into one of these apartments. The irony of it is that May 28th, 1948, Batei Machaseh, the shelter houses that were the great hope for, freedom and for being able to live a good life, this actually became the site of the surrender of the Jewish quarter. And I'll point you in this direction. You can get a sense of what the scene looked like. We'll bring you in a little bit so you can get a sense of what the scene looked like on that tragic day, on that unfortunate day. We're looking at the Rothschild house right over here. Jordanian legionnaire guarding and enforcing the residents of the Jewish quarter who are packing up their things. This Shabbat, there's no smell of fresh challahs baked in the ovens. There's just the stench of defeat and hopelessness and uncertainty. And it gets even worse, because the Jordanian general at the time, Abdallah el-Tal, he arrives here in Batei Machaseh, and he says to the residents, he says, I want everyone who fought for the Jewish quarter, I want you to step forward. Anyone who fought for the Jewish quarter, step forward. He wants to know what he's dealing with. I'll let you guess how many people stepped forward. How many soldiers were there at this time? Remember, fighting against 2,000 Jordanian legionnaires. On the last day of the battle, there were 35 Israeli soldiers. 35 Israeli soldiers, 2 weeks after Israel's declaration of independence. And Abdallah el-Tal looks at them and he's crestfallen. He says, really? If I had known that you were so few, I would have sent my men to fight you in the streets with sticks. And he says, I can't go back like this. He's going to be a laughing stock. 35 soldiers, that's what fought off the greatest, military in the region at the time. And he gives an order for all 290 men and children, all males of the Jewish quarter, to be taken into captivity as prisoners of war. On that day, the women and their daughters head out to West Jerusalem, which had been defended and came under Israeli control. And the men are all sent off to Jordan. And for 19 years, no Jew was allowed to come visit in the Jewish quarter, not to Batei Machaseh, and not to the Western Wall or the Temple Mount, despite the agreements that were in place. 19 years after that, what we celebrate this week, Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, is the return to the Old City and the Jewish quarter. And there's another legend. How true it is, I'll let you discern for yourself, but you never ruin a good story with the facts. There's a legend that there was an old man who had been here in 1948, and when he was able to return here in 1967, he dragged some of the young soldiers. I have to show you something. Come see, look at what I wrote here. And what's now immortalized here in stone was what he had scrawled on the wall before he left, a verse from the prophet Zechariah. Ko amar Adonai Tzevaot, od yeshvu zkenim uzkenot berchovot Yerushalayim, v'ish mishanto biado mirov hayamim, urchovot ha'ir yimal'u yiladim v'iladot misachakim berchovotea. So says God Almighty, the elderly will return to the streets of Jerusalem, each of them leaning on their cane, for they are filled with days. And the streets of the city will fill with young boys and girls playing in the streets. I hope that you were able to see some of the children on their bicycles here today riding around. I hope you were able to get a sense, even though we still haven't completely returned to reality here, we're still not back to what we were before Corona, the children are in the streets here. The words of this prophecy have come true. 1967, when I say it's a miracle, believe or don't believe, but something special happened then. Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel, still lives. And with that hopeful message, as we approach Jerusalem Day, that light at the end of the tunnel, I also bless all of us, all of you who are watching, that soon, you too, we will all return to the streets of Jerusalem. And next year, may it truly be next year in Jerusalem, face to face.